It finally happened. Interest rates came down. Finally, we got the first rate reduction that the Bank of Canada more or less promised we were going to get. But what will this actually mean? And unemployment rate numbers are I shouldn't say skyrocketing. They are moving up. In fact, we got a crazy stat to share with you. All this and more with our good friend and mortgage broker, Mr. Dion Beg. Here we are, my friends, with our favorite mortgage broker in all of the land, Mr. Dion Beg. How you doing, my man?
Hey, Gary. Pretty excited to talk about what happened last week.
Yes, I wish we should do like fireworks or something. Or we've been talking about it for 12 months or more.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, so the reality is the last time the Bank of Canada moved rates, which it was up, and that was in July of 2023. So it's been 11 months since they've moved. But to make it clear for everybody, it's been over 2 years since they started their rate increase, right? So March 2022 was when their rate increases started. Now, we knew it was going to go up for a while, but effectively, we've been waiting for 2 years for some good news, right? And it finally came last week.
Yeah. We should probably do a very brief overview of why the rates were going up, and then of course why many people are banking on them coming back down. But let's talk about very briefly on why they had to move the rates the way that they did.
Sure. Okay. So the 1 minute version. Pandemic happened. Most major governments thought the world was going to stop economically. In order to make sure that the world didn't stop economically, they did two things. They reduced interest rates dramatically, and they pumped money into the economy in the form of economic support. In Canada, that came in the form of CERB to individuals and CEBA to Canadian businesses. So it kept the world turning, so to speak. People were able to pay their mortgages, pay their bills. People were able to remain employed. So they left interest rates very low at a rate of 0.25 at the Bank of Canada overnight rate, which meant you and me and the general public could go out and borrow 5-year money at 2% or less, which was insanely cheap. Okay. That led to a massive increase in people buying property and shares, investment assets. And over that time, people's wealth grew, right? But things were going at such a pace, and prices, as we all saw in the year 21 and 22, were growing at such a pace that the government finally realized they had to tap the brakes on this thing. But they couldn't tap the brakes because they left it for so long. They had to slam their foot on the brake and started increasing interest rates at 0.25, 0.75. We even had a 1% full jump. Do you remember that one, Gary?
Don't
That
want
was a
to.
big shock. Yeah. So basically, guys, in the course of 18 months, interest rates went from 0.25 at the Bank of Canada to 5% at the Bank of Canada. It meant that you and I were borrowing money at 2%, and now it went over to 6.5% at the retail rate. And so the brakes certainly were tapped, and we've all seen it over the last year or two. That's now led into businesses not selling enough product, and therefore not employing enough people, and a whole nother economic impact. So there's enough pain in the system now for the government to now finally turn the corner again.
Yeah, and we've talked about it often. When the government intervenes, it's usually the pendulum is way over here, and they move it over here as almost as fast as they can, and the market reacts, or humans.
And there is always an overreaction, always, right? The government reacts too late or too early, and then the market swings well beyond the intended target of what the government had intended, right? So yeah, we're about to see some of that. Although this, I'll be frank, this 0.25 is not enough to materially change much in your world or mine in terms of affordability. Just for context, it means that for every 100 grand you're borrowing, your rate's dropping by 0.25. Therefore, it's about just under $15 a month in terms of payment. So we're looking at around, on a $500,000 borrowing. For better context, on 500 grand borrowing, your payment's going to drop by $70 to $75 per month. Is that enough for people to have a material change in their economics? No, But what it does do, Gary, is it mentally helps people in the idea that we've been waiting and waiting and waiting for the Bank of Canada to give us a little a little sign that things are going to be better, and that sign has now finally come, right? And actually, on the back of this, some of the more respected economists are saying that this will not be the first. In fact, they're expecting another one in July. I don't like counting chickens, Gary, but there's enough people out there saying, the economic data is such that a July rate drop could also be happening.
Yeah, yeah, and we follow, we somewhat follow the same economic or economist there, excuse me,
Yeah,
and you know, we're being led to believe that it may be down to an even 4% by the end of the year, and that we have a lot of or the Canadian government, Bank of Canada, has a lot of opportunities to get it down to that between now and then. So we'll see what happens. And you're right, like it's less than a tank of gas with the current um, reduction. However, you're right, it's that psychological um, reassurance perhaps that we're headed in the favorable direction of affordability from that perspective, monthly affordability. And you're right, like circling back to why did they increase rates the way that they did. There's a large population of Canada that got outpriced at the market, not by any of their own fault. It just, the prices expedited so fast that the government had to have some sort of intervention there,
yeah,
obviously.
and I'd like to think that it was all about us and our industry and housing, but we aren't the center of the universe, and it had everything to do with inflation, right? Inflation cracked over 8%. At 8%, guys, it means that the value of the money you carry out around in your pocket devalues at 8%. So $100 wasn't worth $100; it was worth $92, right? And that's at the rate at which your value of your currency was being eroded. So that's a very dangerous thing. You've seen examples of countries like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, where they had to add multiple zeros to their banknotes, millions and trillions of dollars of banknotes, and in the extreme. And, most major developed nations never want to get anywhere close to that. And so, yeah, you have to make these corrections. And yeah, I'm happy that we made the correction. I'm unhappy at how long it took for the government to realize that keeping interest rates as low as they did for that long would impact. And hindsight is 2020, right? So now that we can look back and say, oh yeah, who couldn't see this coming? But anyway, we're moving in the right direction, I hope now, Gary.
Yeah, exactly. I just pulled up a really quick chart here from one of the chart websites that I like looking at, and just to kind of give a visual of where we were. Here we go. Yeah, like 2 years ago exactly, we were up at, as you just pointed out, over 8%, and that's not sustainable for any sort of market. And they've been pulling that back down. You can see we're hovering at 2.69%, most recent numbers there.
Right.
um,
So actually, let's just talk about that number. So we'll round it to 2.7. So right now we're at 2.7. The Bank of Canada themselves said their target inflation rate is somewhere between 2 and 3, with a preference to be closer to 2, right? And and it's very interesting how they measure inflation, guys. They measure it year over year. So this year July, or this year June versus last year June. And we're coming into a very interesting territory. And what I mean by that is last year, July, so July 2023 was the last time we saw an interest rate increase. And since then, we haven't had an increase. And I'd be brave enough to say this, Gary, even without any decreases in interest rates, the inflation rate between now and, say, the end of year will go down, simply because if we're now measuring in an environment where interest rates aren't increasing, and therefore the cost of mortgages aren't increasing, whereas last year they were, it means that going forward, that component of inflation will be decreasing. That is, the cost of housing will be decreasing between now and the end of the year. And so, and remember, about 30% of that 2.7% number is cost of housing. And so it's clear that cost of housing should come down as long as prices don't explode between now and the end of the year. The chance of that happening is very, very small because of the inventory. And maybe we should talk about the inventory that you're seeing coming onto market.
yeah, I love the segue.
Mm.
the And that's the interesting thing here. And over the last, 8 weeks, we've been seeing the number of new listings creep up, and last week there was almost like this surge of new listings. Last Wednesday, June 5th, being the interest rate announcement day, and then the following day on Thursday, where two of the biggest listing days that the Toronto Real Estate Board has had this year. I don't have the exact numbers, but into the 800s, 800 plus new listings right across
Right.
Toronto. That's a large number. Then in of all pricing ranges, and we're not just focusing in on one pricing ranges. That was across all price.
Okay, so let me ask you this, Gary, and this is a logistical question.
Uh,
If you wanted to list a property on the day after the interest rate increase, how much prep time would you need as a listing agent to take the photos and do do up all the advertising? Like you'd need a couple of weeks lead time, right?
Absolutely, yeah. If and especially if you're going to deliver a high value to your clients,
Mm,
these 2 to 3 weeks just to set up the staging, the photos, the materials, the online ads, and all that kind of stuff. Yes, can we turn it around quickly? Absolutely, but to do it
mm.
correct, make sure you have
So,
everything.
so for 800 listings to hit that day and break all records, what does that mean? What kind of conversations were happening in the weeks prior?
Yeah, that's interesting. So you have people that are choosing to sell because they want a different home. As always, you have people
Yep.
choose to sell because they want to downsize their perhaps monthly payments. We talk about downsizing home, but we don't often, Dion, talk about downsizing your monthly payment or your budget, right? And that's a big factor into all of this. The strategy to sell
Mm.
uh, comes into factor. Obviously, here's what we do, and I teach all of our agents this as well. And even when I do listing presentations, I talk to our sellers like this: is we're going to do, obviously we're going to do a comparative market analysis, a CMA, and how we do that is by looking at the current homes that are on the market. So, what is my specific or your specific competition? We're going to look at 5+ properties for that. And more importantly, we're going to look to see what sold as closest today, as closest to your property. We're going to look at least 5 properties for that. And that will lead us to evaluation. That'll lead
Hmm.
to strategy. So, did those homes price under market value and get over asking?
Mm.
Strategy. We have all talked about that. What was the sale price to the listing price? So, if you list for $1 million, is it selling for 95% or $950,000?
So for context on that one there, price sold, oh, sorry, price listed versus price sold, back in the madness of 21, what was that number looking like? Because I remember things going well over 100, 200, 300 grand over ask.
Yeah, and it was probably 120% of the asking price if you were
Yeah.
just without looking at.
And now where are we at?
Uh, that's a great question. So if you're looking at a detached home, and this is a broad answer
Yep.
with broad question, broad answer, but
Sure.
you're probably looking at about 99% of the asking price, which means for the moment, sellers are in line with what buyers feel the value of their homes are. We are seeing though a number of new listings come up, and there's more listings are outpacing the sales right now, even though sales are creeping
Right.
up. So
Yep.
perhaps we need to see, or we will see, the sold to listing price decrease somewhat. So maybe it goes to
Uh,
97 or 98%. But as
yeah, because
uh,
as people have more choice, there's more competition. The sellers might have to then understand that there's more competition, therefore reduce pricing.
yeah, perhaps, yeah. The lower the, I'll say it like this. It's always been like this, Dion, as we all know. The lower the value of the home, the higher the chance it is to sell for over ask. It's always been
Hmm.
right. So if you have an entry level home, and I'm talking townhouses and perhaps some semis, that will always be top market. Is the Toronto condo market is someone's hit a pause button, and
Right.
you probably, maybe you own a condo yourself and you're thinking of selling, or you have one for sale. We're seeing that being dragged out tremendously. So there's, for some reason right now, there's not a lot of condo buyers. So if you're a
Correct.
buyer looking for a condo in the Toronto area, there's going to be opportunity for you.
Yeah, correct. And I think especially if you're an end user and you have a longer time horizon, the interesting thing about condos right now, Gary, is there is an excessive amount of supply, right? And not enough buyers. But when I look at the charts for uh, new builds and new construction starts for condominiums, as you and I both know, there's been a big pause from developers saying we will not build anymore, will not create any new starts in the near future. And a chart that I saw showed that, for the last 10 years or so, we've had 20 to 30,000 new condos delivered to market in the GTA. And in about 3 years from now, I think the number was 3 to 4 years, that number is going to drop below 10,000, close to 9,000. And I wonder what's going to happen when supply drops so dramatically at that point. Could there be a potential uptick in condo pricing at that time? But if you've got a 5 year time horizon on a condo and you're in particular an end user, it might make sense right now.
That's that's an interesting strategy, and we got it for sure. Yeah, there's if you are a condo buyer, you're in the market, you probably already know that there's not one or two options in one building. There might be as many as 10 or 15 options in one.
Mm.
That's a lot to choose from, which is good. So let's talk about this, tying back into rate drops and inflation. Obviously,
Yeah.
we have GDP and unemployment that kind of gets all thrown into that ball of wax too. So let's kind of talk about some of that, what's been going on.
Yes, sure. So a lot of the reason why these economists think that there's more rate drops in the cards is because unemployment has increased over 1% year over year, right? So the rate of unemployment. Keep in mind that immigration has added close to 3% to our population during that time. Okay, but and I think do you have an article there, Gary, which shows the immigration or the job creation versus population? There we go.
I do. And this is an article from Better Dwelling that just came out June 7th. We can see it right here. And let me just scroll down to exactly what it is that you're talking about. And it's right in here. Canada's population growth is 3 times its job creation rate, Dion.
Yeah, guys. So that means for every one job created, there are three uh, adult working age people in the population who would want that job, but there's only one job available. So again, we've spoken about population growth versus housing. This is population growth versus employment, right? And they're all interlinked. And it clearly shows that we're not creating enough jobs in pace with the increase in population. So yeah, with inflation up with immigration up, jobs down, and GDP, the GDP number, guys, has grown. So technically, we can say that we don't have a recession. But when you look at the GDP per capita, this is where we can see that for the last 7 consecutive quarters, we are down. So GDP per capita has been on a downward slide for 7 quarters. And if we measured a recession by GDP per capita, then we'd certainly be in a recession. And I've said this before, if you feel like you're in a recession, it's because we are in one. It's just not officially one based on the current definition of it.
Yeah, yeah, and we had a similar chart up earlier when you and I were off camera talking about this, and this explains the exact same thing, but so excuse me, a little bit of a timeline here, and and you can see what's been going on with the unemployment for the last few years, and of course these are we'll call them the COVID years, Dion,
Mm.
and you mentioned this too as the unemployment decreased. That was kind of a surprise to us through some of that COVID, and now it's creeping back up. And your point was perhaps it's
Yeah,
the urban and everything else.
correct. So during the so that decline happened from 21 to 22, and that was still the period in which government was keeping rates low as well as pumping out the support in terms of CERB and other things, incentivizing employers to keep their employees on, and so that happened. And so in during that 1 year period, unemployment decreased. But then you see it tick up there, coinciding with the stop of the government support, as well as the slight increase in interest rates. And when you take those two things out of the economy at one time, then yeah, what happens is employers let go of people who were employed simply because of government assistance, right? And also, consumers reduced their demand for, say, consumer products. So there were fewer things being sold because interest rates were on the incline. And yeah, and that's led to the increase in unemployment. So now at nearly 1.4 million.
Yeah, yeah. And to tie that into it, that has a huge ripple effect on not only, in our industry, but, also on what people are willing to spend money on these days, right? As the interest rates increased and perhaps they were to borrow money to do some work on their home, update
Mm.
was as it were. And I know, one of the top window installers or companies in all of Toronto, their sales are down about 40% year over year, just based on the cost of A, now that new window that has to go in, but B, the available funds that people have to go invest in things like that. So it has that ripple effect of everything, right?
I would imagine, and in our world, we call it deferred maintenance, right, Gary? I
Yeah.
would imagine right now there's a lot of deferred maintenance. People who need new roofs, new windows, just minor repairs on their home, but have chosen to just push it off to a later date when things look a little bit better. So maybe again, maybe that'll turn the corner in the near future. I don't think this quarter point is enough, but if we see a trend, and if we are lucky enough to see, right now we've dropped 0.25. I would say, in my humble opinion, it would be best case we get three total rate drops by the end of the year, which would drop us by a total of 0.75. And some people say with me, Dion, when will this materially impact affordability? The reality is we're probably a total of 1 to 1.5% off where we need to be. So that could be that affordability issue is going to remain an issue probably deep into next year, until we hit, 1 to 1.5% drop from the high of 5%.
Well, as you were saying there, something kind of piqued my memory. I'm starting to see, and I don't know about you, a lot of those, home services like the shingles and maybe even the windows too. But I have seen ads for shingles lately from roofing companies. Don't pay to 2025, kind of that whole Leon's and brick
Mm,
sales
interesting.
strategy.
Yep.
And I just thought to myself, yes, you're probably going to pay slightly more for that because you're deferring your payment. However, though, if you truly do believe that, if you're going to use your line of credit as an example, home equity line of credit, if that payment's going to be 1% less than what it is today, maybe that's an opportunity for you to get it done. And just kind of thinking out loud, as we're starting to see more and more of that type of advertising. So
Yeah.
contractors are getting creative on how to generate income for their
Well,
business as
let's be
well.
clear. That's how Canadians have bought cars for decades, right? So, and frankly, a roof is likely more important than a car in some cases, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, very, very good, my friend. There's a lot going on, and there will be a lot going on in the market over the summer months here, based on different government initiatives and interaction and trying to create more affordability. And we're seeing right now, governments and at the local level are creating excuse me, going to different conventions and masterminds and getting together and how to create more affordable housing. So we're
Yep.
seeing that, and we're having the right conversations, and we're getting there. Of course, it all comes down to our interest rates and affordability. So that's important. So stay tuned, is what I'm saying, as Dion and I kind of break it down each and every Monday. Dion, how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, kangamortgage.ca or the Dion Beg on Instagram.
There you go. So that's Mr. Dion Beg. I'm Gary McGowan. We'll see everybody in the next episode. Goodbye for now.